It's time to quilt! Hello, and welcome back to my studio. Today we're going to start a new project that combines machine applique, thread painting, some complementing free motion quilting designs, and even some fabric paint if you want to create this great art quilt. At about 38 by 48 inches, this project is sized for a wall hanging or lap quilt. You could also add more center blocks and frame pieces to make it large enough for a bed quilt. Maybe for an heirloom quality wedding present? Using the same set of techniques I'll show you here. This project took its inspiration from two sources. One was a quilt called Canterbury Silk that I made for competition some years back. It combined applique, artistic quilting, painting, and embroidered text in the style of an ancient manuscript. It's still one of my favorites. The second was a whole cloth thread art panel I made purely as an experimental test project based on a picture from a Dover book. I liked the design a lot, but wanted to give it more punch, and this project gets that from the deep red backing and the colorful cotton applique. This project may look ambitious, but I think you'll find it completely doable. I designed it as an intermediate project you can make one stage at a time. Throughout this series of videos, I'll walk you through it step by step, and I'll share with you my own tips and tricks along the way. For quilting, I'm using my Bernina Q20 sit-down long arm, but there's no reason you can't make this project entirely on a domestic machine. I made both a YouTube short video and a blog posting on setting up your domestic machines for free motion quilting, if you're interested in making it that way. Over the course of this series, we'll break the project down into easily achievable segments. Today, I'll show you how to lay out the patterns for the applique. We'll assemble the center panel, we'll piece the frame together, and get everything ready to start in on the main block's thread art. In future videos, we'll stitch in the thread art. We'll lay out and quilt the rest of the block and the decorative frame elements. Then we'll turn our attention to finishing touches, like where you might want to use fabric paint to highlight some key details. Now, let's get started. The first step is to print all of the different pieces of the pattern we'll need. You can make your own design if you like, but to make this project even more achievable, I've made a complete pattern, materials list, and illustrated instruction guide available on my website for a nominal fee. Print the pieces of the central block pattern on regular paper. We'll assemble these in a minute. I printed the patterns for the appliques on Steamer Seam 2. They're already reversed, so you can print them right to the yellow grid side of the Steamer seam and iron them to the back of your applique fabrics. This makes them really handy, but the pages are just a little larger than letter size. If your printer can't handle that, you can print the shapes separately and trace them onto the fabric and fusible web. You may find it handy to go ahead and cut these pieces loosely around the edge. I printed stitching guides for the thread art on some sheets of sulky, sticky Fabri-Solvi water-soluble stabilizer. Say that 3 times fast. These have to be printed with an inkjet printer, not a laser. We'll talk more about using these later. Finally, I printed the designs for stitching on the border and corner blocks on regular paper. Now, here's a copy of the central pattern put together and taped down on my light table, but let me show you how we assemble it. Pick one piece that you want to be the base. Then take the piece that adjoins it and look where the design and grid lines stop. Use those to align your ruler and slice off the edge with a rotary cutter. Tape the two pieces together and repeat the process for the other pages, adding them in and taping them together using the grid lines to help you align the pattern carefully. When you're done, tape the whole thing down to your light tablet. If you can, you may want to keep it there while we're working on this project so you'll have all the shapes to refer to later. Off camera, I cut a piece of a rich red cotton for the central block, 25.5 inches by 35.5 inches. I backed mine with a lightweight fusible interfacing, Pellon SF101. However, it depends on the weight of your quilting cotton whether you need this or not. If it's very lightweight, you will want to put it in. I folded it in half both directions and steam pressed a little crease in the middle area to help me find the center and place the pattern. Now, while I've got the iron and ironing pad out, let's get our appliques ready. You're going to need small pieces of cotton and a few different solid colors, green for the leaves, light and dark blues for the birds, and probably purples for the flowers. If you haven't already, rough cut the printed steamer seam back to a comfortable margin around each piece. For each color, iron the fabric a bit first so you don't get wrinkles in your applique. I use a pin just to score the back of the steamer seam, and that makes it easy to peel off. Place it on the fabric and iron it down. Use a sharp pair of scissors to carefully trim the applique back right to the printed lines. You can use the same trick with scoring the backing before peeling it off, and your applique is ready to use. Then just repeat those steps for the other 5 appliques. Now, on to marking the quilt and placing the appliques. Pull out your light table with the pattern taped to it and spread your red center panel over it. When you turn on the tablet, you'll see that the small creases we made in the fabric let you center the design easily. Smooth it out and chalk where the outlines of the appliques should go. I'm using a Bohan chalk cartridge pencil set. By the way, if you don't have a large enough light tablet, or you want to try a different method, take a look at the short video I posted about using a portable laptop projector for marking. I demonstrated it using the same pattern, so you can use whichever method works best for what you have. Once you're done marking the outlines, you can start placing your appliques. Be careful to put them down in the right order, so that the appliques that go in back are behind the ones that go in front. This is important to make sure the stitching designs we'll mark later line up perfectly with the applique pieces. In my pattern book, they're numbered, so you can put them down by number and it will work fine. When you have the appliques placed just like you want, it's time to iron them down. Make sure you don't iron on top of your light tablet. Next, it's time to sew down the edges of the appliques. For each applique, I chose a 40 weight matching thread. We want to stitch the pieces in back first, which means we need to start with the green thread to match the leaves. I selected a narrow blanket stitch on my machine, with the width set to 1.7 and length at 1.5. I'm using an 8012 Schmetz Super Non-Stick needle. Use an open-toed embroidery foot and move your needle as far to the right as possible. On my Bernina, I use the number 20D foot and I have the dual feet engaged. But don't worry if your machine doesn't have that option. Run the edge of the applique piece along the inside right toe of the foot as you stitch. You want the left stitches on the applique and the right stitches just off of it. Where there's a tight corner, I'm stopping the stitching and turning the work with the needle down. I won't use this color to stitch the edge where another applique is on top of the leaf. Instead, I'll stitch that one down on top using the color matching the applique on top. Now that you have the appliques sewn down, let's go back to the light tablet and mark out our stitching lines for the thread art. Of course, if you use the overhead projection method in my YouTube short video to place your appliques, you probably have your stitching lines already marked. In that case, you can ignore this part altogether. I found that with these deep colors and multiple layers of fabric interfacing in fusible web, it might be tough to see the stitching lines to trace them directly, unless you have an unusually powerful light table. So that's where the sheets of sticky Fabrisavi we printed earlier come in. They're water soluble, which means we can just put the printed designs down where we need them, stitch right through them, and then dissolve them away later. We'll just use the light table as kind of a guide to help us place them. You'll need to trim back the printed sheets with scissors so they're almost right along the edge where they need to be placed down. That way, they won't get in each other's way when they come close to overlapping. Once you peel off the backing, try not to let the pieces fold back on themselves and stick together because it's hard to separate if it does. The sticky Fabrisavi sticks down a lot harder than fusible web, but it is still possible to move it if you need to. Just don't iron it because it distorts and it might not come off. Some of the pieces we printed are for stitch work that goes directly onto the backing fabric rather than the appliques, but they get placed just the same, using the light tablet to guide where they go. At this point, you can untape the pattern for the central block from your light tablet. Off camera, I cut 4 7.5-inch square blocks from the red fabric for the corners with a rotary cutter. I also cut 4 strips of black cotton 7.5 inches wide for the edges. 2 of these are 35.5 inches long and 2 are 25.5 inches long. When I do 1/4 inch seams for piecing, I really like to use Bernina's 97D foot. I also use the single hole plate. The 97D is designed for just this kind of stitching. It comes with an edge fence that helps you keep your 1/4 inch seam very even. I pin the main block and the edge piece together with just a few pins to help keep it from getting off track. Get it set to start sewing at the end and you're ready to go, pulling the pins out as you go down the edge. Stitch the corner blocks to the ends using the same procedure. Finally, press the seams and then stitch the end assemblies to the main block. With the frame assembled, use a ruler and chalk to mark the center of each edge piece. Cut and tape together the paper patterns for the decorative quilting on the edges, using the grid lines to help you align the pages just like you did for the center block. I'll hold the pattern against the end piece so you can see that the grid area on the pattern is designed to help you easily align the stitching designs on the border for marking them using your light tablet. Here on this side, you can see what it should look like once these are marked. There's a little space between the two designs, and maybe when we stitch this, we can do something creative in between. The top and the bottom have their own pattern, made to a slightly different size, and you can just repeat the same procedure you used for the sides. The cornerstones have their own patterns too, so you can mark them the same way. And with that done, we're ready to move on. I hope you've enjoyed this first episode of my new applique and stitchwork quilt. At this point, we have our applique fused and secured down and our top assembled and marked. We're ready to sandwich our quilt and start in on a real highlight of this project, our thread painting. In our next video, I'll show you some tips and techniques for doing just that. As always, if you have any questions or comments, please post them below and I'll try to get back to you as soon as possible. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel. It's YouTube's way of letting you follow my videos so you know when the next one comes out. And if you do make this project, and especially if you make a larger version with more panels, I'd love to hear from you. I have been thinking about giving my viewers an opportunity to have their versions of my projects displayed in a future video. See you next time, and until then, have fun in your studios!